Hello again, and welcome to the latest video where we're going to be reviewing German tanks available to you in GOH Ostfront. That is right, German tanks. Clickbait. So, thank you again for joining us today, and if you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel, and I do appreciate it. So, let's get down to it, because we do have quite a lot of ground to cover today. So, starting off with the light tanks, and I'm going to do pretty much just the whole run through all the German tanks. We'll cover tank destroyer, self-propelled artillery in some later videos, but I kind of want to give a good overview of the entire tank inventory, because there's quite a lot available to German players. Not that many tanks, just crap tons of renditions of each of the base models. So, all right, starting with our light tanks, we have the Panzer I. So, basic, pretty light armor, 8 to 14. So, you know, you're okay. You're stopping small arms fire. You're not having to worry about machine guns. You're no longer a wheeled vehicle, as if it ever was, and you're pretty good against infantry. Anything with anti-tank capability and tank rifles, things like that, you're gonna have to worry out about. And the other thing is you are limited to 2 MG13s, which do have quite a limited ammo capacity, so watch out for that. You will need to accompany this with infantry, but it's a reasonable little vehicle early on. It's cheap, not great. I'm not a very big fan of them, though. I find that their utility is pretty limited, to say the least. So, you know, if you can, go on to something a little better. Now, there is the Panzer I F, which is a little different. So it's got MG34 as a dual, so a lot more firepower just because they do have, I guess, a bigger magazine capacity, or belt in this case, so they can fire for longer, which is really helpful. And you do now have 10 to 80 hull armor and 20 to 80 on the turret, so this thing is very thick. Essentially, it's meant to be a infantry support, breakthrough, mine resistant-ish type vehicle. So it's basically a Panzer I they really beefed up. Kind of an interesting little vehicle. Just so you know, the Panzer I has a speed of 40. This is 25, so nearly cut in half, but you do get a crap ton of armor for that. So an interesting little vehicle. The problem is, yeah, okay, it can survive most things, but when you get there, you still only have a machine gun. So, neat, good for maybe fighting against lighter anti-tank guns, emplaced infantry, but, you know, again, it's going to have a pretty limited utility, especially when you do come up against other tanks who, you know, really mid to late on will be able to penetrate you in theory. So, kind of a cool idea, but not maybe the best. The Panzer II, so now you have a little bit heavier, kind of 5 to 14, so you're still quite light, but you do have, you know, 40 speed, so it's quite maneuverable for a tank, and you do have a 20mm cannon with coaxial MG34, so a lot more firepower. Definitely worth it in the early conquest battles, because you are going to be able to deal with most soft skins and most lighter armored vehicles, armored cars, things like that. You'll have no problem with, and you're going to be great against infantry. That being said, your armor is still quite thin, so you do have to worry about anything with anti-tank capability. But decent little light tank, decent for scouting, good early on, but you know, you will want to go to something with an actual gun on it. But as light tanks go, it's pretty good, and it is available to you very soon, so that's definitely a solid choice early on in conquest battles. Panzer II as well. Pretty much the same armament. The armor has been done up quite a bit, and it does have additional 15 armor. So same speed. You know, it does definitely solve that armor issue on the Panzer II, but you know, you haven't really lost any speed. It is a light tank though, but definitely, you know, a better option. But to be honest, don't worry about it. Just go for a better option, I think. You know, something a little heavier maybe, or something with a little better gun on it. Not to knock the 20mm, but it is going to be quite limited unless you're dealing with just armored cars and soft skins and infantry, of course. All right, now we have the Lukes. So the Panzer II, but it's been heavily modified, so quite a bit quicker now with a speed of 60, and you do have up to 30 armor. So much better in terms of your protection and your mobility with the same armament. So you are going to have that weapons limitation, though you are, a little better protected, a little more maneuverable. So great as a recce tank, great as infantry support. If you do want to run more of a recce or light force, that's definitely a decent option for you. That's not personally my flavor, but I do think that this is a pretty good light tank option if that's what you're going to go for. And it is one of the sort of fewer light tanks available to the Germans. So the Panzer 35T. So this is one of the captured, or I guess repurposed at this point, Czech tanks. So up to 25 for armor, speed of 34, so not bad. The hull armor is a little bit light, but that's okay. You do have, decent armor for very early on in conquest battles. You do have a 37 millimeter gun, though the penetration on it is a little bit limited, and it doesn't have a very good high explosive round, though you do have two quite potent machine guns. The MG37, that's basically the Czech machine gun that you see in a lot of these tanks. Yeah, I think honestly a much better machine gun than the MG34, just personally. A lower rate of fire, so you're not burning through your ammo as fast, and I find it's a little bit more accurate. The MG34, in my taste, it has a bit too much spread on it. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion, but I do prefer something a little more accurate. So not a bad option, but if you can upgrade to the Panzer 38T. So you still have a 37 millimeter gun, though this one is a lot more potent. You have about the same armor, but that gun is now actually, that's going to do a lot more for you. Otherwise, you still have the same secondary armament with the two MG37s, but that gun, you're going to have better high explosive, and you're going to have a lot better armor penetrating capability. So a much better choice, and you also have, I think, one of the better early war light tanks available to you. And then the 38T, so a later model, about the same. It has been up armored though to 50 max. You do have the same armament. It is in a later war camo. So yeah, these were actually kept in service sort of a lot longer than maybe they should have been, but if it works, it works, and there was a lot of secondary theater, so an okay option if you want to field, maybe a force representing some security troops or sort of second-rate troops. Great option. It is, it's a fair light tank, especially with up to 50 millimeters of armor. Okay, so moving on to the Panzer III. So the Panzer III, despite it looking a lot like the Panzer IV, is still quite a light tank with only a maximum of 30 millimeters. Decently maneuverable, but don't let it fool you. It is a little bit lighter than you may think. You do essentially have the same armament as the 38, but here you do have two coaxial MG34s, so good against infantry, but otherwise you are still going to have to worry about any anti-tank weapons that you're going to come up against. Otherwise, yeah, solid enough vehicle if you want to go down that kind of medium tank route. So good enough, especially early on. You are going to have no trouble dealing with a lot of light tanks and infantry, though you are still going to, have a lot of the failings that are just inherent in any of the early tanks available to you in a conquest battle. Next version of it, to be honest, you don't really gain anything by going from the E to the F, other than a 5-centimeter gun. It is going to be a little more effective, but not that the 37 millimeter is a bad gun. For the same armor, same speed, not sure about it. If you can, just save up your research points and skip on to the H, because now you do have a lot more armor with that same 50 millimeter gun. You know, otherwise you're essentially the same tank, you're just better armed, better protected. So definitely worth it, I think, to just jump onto the H. You know, just in my personal opinion, that extra armor does really make a difference, especially as you're now going to be coming up against slightly heavier tanks by the time you get to this research level in a conquest battle. And then the J, so you have lost a little bit of armor here. You do still have that 50 millimeter gun, so not bad. But if you can skip this one and just go right on to the J with the long barrel, now you have actually a pretty potent anti-tank weapon. Same speed, same armor, but that is actually a pretty good anti-tank weapon, especially against medium tanks. You're going to have some trouble taking out, you know, anything heavier than some of the early T-34s. You're going to have trouble with anything like, you know, a Sherman from the front, but against any of the BTs, you know, Stuart tanks, you don't have to worry about Lees. You don't have to worry about any of the Soviet light tanks. So definitely not a bad choice there, and it does give you a lot more range. So despite having a slight downgrade in the armor, you're going to have that range that you can just kind of stand off and deal with things a lot more effectively. Now moving on to the L, you know, same kind of 50 millimeter gun, but it is a little bit upgraded. It's not a bad tank at this point, but I don't really see the huge utility in going to this one. You know, maybe a little better protected in the armor distribution, but, you know, I wouldn't worry about actually going to this, and instead I would just go right onto the M. You know, you're going to have that additional side skirting, which is going to protect you from especially infantry anti-tank weapons, and the armor, you know, it's not really any thicker, but you do have that side skirting and still that pretty effective gun. Though by this point you are going to notice that the Panzer III is feeling a little bit aged, especially as you come against some of the sort of T-34s, better Shermans from sort of the American side. So not a bad tank, but, you know, you are going to be, you know, maybe at a slight disadvantage at this point. And then the final version, the Panzer III N. So you have the same armor, you do have the extra armor added onto the turret here, and now you have the 75 millimeter short gun. So that's actually not a bad gun. It's great against infantry, it's great against sort of emplacements, anti-tank guns, things like that. You aren't really armored enough to be able to shrug off an anti-tank round, but you do have a great support gun, and it does have a heat round. So you're actually going to be quite effective against armor as well, though it's going to be quite low velocity, so you may not have quite the range. But, you know, if you do want to stick with that Panzer III route, I guess this is the best you're going to get. But I would just recommend skipping a lot of that and just going right into the Panzer IVs, right? Just research past it, unless you really have a reason that you want to represent a force with Panzer IIIs. So the first one available to you is the Panzer IV-D. You've got essentially the same armor with a maximum of 30 millimeters as the Panzer III. Your speed, you know, 42 versus 40, so whatever. However, you do have the 75 millimeter gun, so quite an effective gun. You do have a decent heat round, great high explosive as well, so not a bad choice. And you're going to notice that this is quite a good tank, especially early on. Little lightly armored, but that 75 will do quite a lot of work for you. And it's also quite a versatile gun. The short-barreled 75 it's a lot better than I think a lot of people think. You don't have to go for the long barrel, especially sort of early to mid conquest battles. The F1, so, you know, a little bit of improvement. You do have more hull armor, which is great. Same speed, same gun. So definitely worth it, I think. Really, the D's main failing is 30 hull armor versus 50. So worth upgrading for sure. And you do still have that pretty effective armament. You have the coaxial, the hull mounted, and then the short 75. So not bad. And then you have the F2 again. So, the same tank, except now you have the long-barreled 75. So this is actually going to be quite an effective anti-tank weapon. It's going to give you a lot more range. If you are dealing with tanks, and if you're worried about armor, this is the vehicle to go for. If you're worried more about lighter vehicles, emplacements, the short barrel's the one to go for. You may not know what you're going to be up against, but having a mix of them is actually not a bad idea if you're going to be putting together a conquest loadout. Otherwise, the long barrel's probably going to be a better all-around option, though you are going to have less of a high explosive round. Doesn't really matter in my opinion, just support it with infantry and, put an extra round onto it. It's not that big of a deal. Then you have the Panzer IV G. So now you have maximum hull armor of 80 millimeters, which is really quite good. Otherwise, you have essentially the same armament. So better protected, same gun, worth it, I think, in my opinion. And then you have the next version, the H, with the side skirts. So pretty good, especially against anything with shape charge. It is going to help you with anti-tank rifles, especially. That is what they were intended to help defeat. And you do still have that pretty effective 75 millimeter gun. So solid medium tank here. You really don't need to go anything better than the Panzer IV, actually. It's really quite a good tank. It's got a good gun. The hull armor is quite good, if not a little thin at the side and areas, but not a perfect tank, but definitely a good all-around tank if you're a German player. You do not have to go for the big cats, the Panthers and Tigers and things like that. To be honest, kind of overrated and quite expensive. These are definitely good enough vehicles. And then the Panzer IV J, same armor essentially. I do believe you get a upgraded 75 millimeter gun, and you also get the pintle mounted gun, which you do also get on the H. Slightly less side skirts, though you do have a little bit of additional armor with these tracks. They aren't just aesthetic in most cases. So great tank, great medium tank. You're going to have no issue dealing with most enemy tanks you're going to come up against. It's okay against infantry. And it's a little bit cheaper than the Panthers, so you can probably afford slightly more of them, or maybe an extra infantry squad, maybe some more support. So definitely something to think about, to just not invest all your money in armor and go for a more rounded force. So something to think about. And then, yes, it's big cats. This is really what you've been waiting for. I know how you are aware of it, is the Panther D. So hull armor up to 80, though notice the side armor actually quite thin. So be very careful with how you're using these. You do have a very good gun. It's a 75, but it is, quite an upgrade from the Panzer IV. Pretty fast, actually, at 55 for its size. Surprisingly fast. Though you do really have to worry about how you're placing it, because a side shot will be able to kill you quite easily. Though frontally, you are quite well protected with 80 millimeters on the front, angled, and 100 millimeters on the mantlet. So decently protected from the front, 45 from there, 40 from there, 20, right? So you really do have to be quite careful with how you're using it, but if you orient it well, you'll be good. And then the Panther G, a little bit more armor. You now have the pintle machine gun, which is a great way to get your commander killed. I don't like using the pintle machine guns, actually. I've lost more commanders than I care to say. However, definitely a pretty good tank. You are a little slower, but that's fine. You were never really worried about that in the first place. It's still 46, so quite good. A little bit of an upgrade to the side armor, but not much. A little bit of upgrade to the front armor, not much, but quite a well-rounded tank. Though you still have to worry about that placement, and you do have quite an effective gun for dealing with enemy tanks. And you're not going to have too much issue with infantry because you do have two, reasonably okay machine guns. Not my favorite tank machine guns, but pretty good. Don't use the Pintle, you'll lose a commander. And finally, the Tiger. Yes, the tank porn. So, yep, the Tiger E. Earlier one you can get, you have up to 130 millimeters of armor on the front, so 102 down there, 130 on your mantlet, 82 on the sides of the turret, although only 30 millimeters down there, so you are still more vulnerable than you are maybe expecting with the Tiger. It's not a perfect tank. It's going to be quite expensive. It's going to take up a lot of research points. It's going to take up a lot of your resources. They do go through fuel, not quite as bad as the Panzer II, but you do have a very effective 88 millimeter gun, which it's pretty good. You can take out most tanks with this, no problem. In conquest battles, in the type of fighting you're actually going to deal with in Gates of Hell, it's actually quite a good tank. I'm not a big fan of the Tiger in real life, but in this game, you're not really worried about the repair. You're not worried about the fuel, really. You're not worried about having to supply it. You're not worried about having to actually drive the thing, or, it's in a tactical situation without any of the actual issues around it, so it's quite good. Though it's not a perfect tank. I've taken out these with, tanks that T-34s, Shermans, things like that. You're not impervious, though. It's still quite a good tank for this kind of battle. You don't have to worry about all the issues with it. So, worth it, and hey, it is a Tiger, so if you're a German player, you're probably into that. And then the Tiger H, so a little bit of an armor upgrade. You still have the 88. Reasonably maneuverable, actually. 38, so not super quick, but like, look at the thing. If you're into heavy tanks, this is kind of the best you're going to get for Tigers. To be honest, like, you don't necessarily need to upgrade. The, E is fine, but the H, hey, go for it if you want. If you really want to be ridiculous, go for the Tiger II. This is the only tank in Gates of Hell that I've run out of fuel in. You have a very good gun. You have extremely thick armor, up to 150 millimeters. What the hell? But you will actually potentially run out of fuel. I don't really recommend actually taking fuel trucks. Take ammo, unless you have a Tiger II. You will actually probably need a fuel truck. So just be aware of that. And you know what? You can still get tracked. You can still get taken out. So if you're playing this, you're not God. You can still get taken out. And it's going to be really expensive. Honestly, if you want to do it, go for it. I don't really like the super heavy tank loadout. Though, hey, it's fun. You can do it. So, decent all-around tank. You do still have 2 machine guns. Don't use the Pintle. I reiterate, you'll lose a commander. Great main gun. So, not a bad choice if that's the route you want to go. Not my personal thing, but hey, you do you. So that's the run-through of the German, and I guess some of the Czech tanks available to you in Gates of Hell Ostfront. So all around, I think, quite a broad list. You really do get sort of the light tanks, Panzer III, 4, and then your Panther and heavy vehicles. Okay, so that's an overview of the tanks available to you as a German player. At least the actual German tanks and some Czech. Overall, I think, you have a pretty broad list of vehicles. A lot of them I would honestly skip over. It's maybe not worth going through every rendition. You're going to have to use the research points, but don't necessarily actually invest in kitting out with it unless you have some reason that maybe you really like that tank. But you definitely have some options. To be honest, none of them are the perfect vehicle. None of them are my favorite tank, but I think you do have a lot of really great options available to the German faction. So we're not over. There are captured tanks also available to you, which I thought I would include as well. So starting off, you have the Panzer 38H, so the little Renault R35, I believe, but it's been kitted out with the long 37 millimeter gun, so up to 40 millimeters of armor. Pretty good, especially early on. You are slowish, but not really that bad. The main issue is you don't have a hull machine gun. Your crew is quite small, so your reload time is going to be a little longer than maybe you'd want, with that commander being very busy up in the turret. Though you have a reasonable anti-tank gun, pretty okay armor, and definitely not a bad option if you want to do maybe more of a second line German unit or some more security forces, anti-partisan type operations. The Germans did use a lot of these, surprisingly more than people are aware. They did rely on a lot of captured vehicles, a lot of captured trucks, tanks, things like that, especially going into Russia. And then basically the same thing, but now you have 4 rockets strapped to the side. This thing scares me. You are a lot more vulnerable with those rockets on the side, though it does provide you with quite a punch if you want to, use it kind of like self-propelled artillery. And to be honest, at that point, I wouldn't even bother using it as a tank unless you're out of ammo. Just use it as artillery, as a rocket launcher. It's fantastic for that. Kind of neat, kind of sketchy, but hey, it's cool. I like it. And then we have the Panzer 731R, so basically the T-37 captured. It's, up to 10 millimeters of armor, so you actually will, depending on where they're hitting you, have to worry about small arms or really anything with any armor penetrating capability. You're not that maneuverable, and you really only have the DT machine gun, which is, in my opinion, it's my least favorite tank machine gun, even less than the MG34. It's honestly, I don't like it as a Soviet player. If you want to maybe represent, again, those sort of rear line German units, anti-partisan force security units, things like that, it's cool. I never really liked it as a Soviet player, but it is available to you. It's kind of neat, but you're going to be underprotected and underarmed. So not great, but hey, it's cool. It's neat. And the BT, so the Panzer 742R, so the R designation does indicate basically captured Russian vehicle, even though it is Soviet, but Russian. So up to 20 millimeters of armor, not the worst. It's a light tank, though you do have the 45 millimeter gun, which is actually quite a potent anti-tank gun early on in conquest battles. You're quite quick at 52. So kind of cool. The Germans did use a lot of captured Soviet vehicles on the Eastern Front. So kind of cool thing to represent, a little bit different. You're still going to have a lot of the same limitations as a light tank, but yeah, cool vehicle. And then you're going to have the captured Samoa, the 35S or 35S 739F, F for French. So you do have a pretty potent 47 millimeter gun, so that's the French anti-tank gun, and you're going to have the MG31, which I believe is actually the French machine gun in it, which is, in my opinion, quite actually a good machine gun for a tank. You have up to 47 millimeters of hull armor and 56 on the turret, so quite well protected. Speed of 40, not bad actually. You don't have a hull machine gun, so you're going to have to just use your turret armament, which the traverse, if I remember correctly, is not very quick. Though it is actually it's a decent little medium tank. I would rate it kind of the Panzer III or slightly better, though you don't necessarily have the potential to research further. So it's kind of a dead end, but it's a good vehicle. The only way you can really go from that is to the Char B1. So in this case, the B2 740F. Up to 60 millimeters of armor, so actually quite a lot for early on. You do have a 47 centimeter anti-tank gun in the turret, along with a coaxial machine gun. Quite slow rotating turret, but not bad. And you do have a, I believe, a 75 millimeter gun in the hull, which is kind of weird. Short range, low velocity, but it does provide you essentially an assault gun, kind of like the Stug. Cool tank, pretty heavy. I've had a lot of trouble taking these out, especially as a Soviet player early on, though this is kind of the end of the road for you if you are going to be doing captured vehicles, unless you want to just start capturing vehicles you can take in conquest battles. But yeah, cool vehicle, pretty pretty cool way to, I think, play the Germans if you want to just use captured vehicles. But you're really slow at 28, and this is kind of the end of the road for you in terms of research. So you will be quite easily taken out by a lot of the mid or late vehicles. And then the KV-1, but it's been re-equipped with the 75 millimeter high velocity anti-tank gun. So it gives you actually up to 105 millimeters of armor, speed of 34, so you're not very quick, but you are freaking heavy. And they have upgraded with that 75. So this, in my opinion, is a very good vehicle. They've pretty much re-kitted out with the MG34, replacing the DT. Good choice. And it's pretty neat, I think. You do have a fully redone up captured vehicle. They did do these, in some reasonable numbers. So kind of a cool thing to show, and a heavy, well-armed vehicle. Kind of the Panther, but slower, better armored, sorry. So quite a cool tank. Anyways, so that is the captured vehicles available to you as a German player. I think some pretty neat choices, if not the best in terms of stats. Pretty cool to actually play as. So anyways, zooming out, the whole German tank list available to you. Thank you again for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel, and I appreciate it. And I will see you next time when we will review more tanks. All right, bye.